who's behind the TV for those of you that can't see Terry. He is the regional engineer that is in our Richfield office. Then we have Hayden Coombs. He's back there in the center of the wall. He's also in the Richfield office. We have Dion Gardner, and many of you probably know Dion. He's been with us for a while. And then we also have Lucy Ketterer next to Dion there. So water right questions for this area, if you go to the Richfield office, those are the folks that will help you. And Terry will also be presenting today. So let me jump into the agenda. Well, actually, I'm going to do a couple more things. Did you pick this up when you came in? So make sure and grab one before you leave. This just has a QR code on the back of this card that will take you directly to the groundwater page on our website, where we will post the video that's being recorded and any documents that relate to this effort moving forward. The attendance list, the comments that we receive, they'll all get posted to this webpage. And so we just created this QR code to take you directly there, so you don't have to try and navigate our website. So make sure and pick up a card. Also, make sure you sign in out there as well. If you haven't signed in, do before you leave. That is how we're going to get additional notices to you, is through that sign-up sheet. So make sure that you sign up.
Still get there, right?
Yeah, you just have to navigate your way in. Yeah. And then the meeting is being streamed online. And then we will put a recording of the meeting on that web page that you'll go to. And then for those online, if you have questions, you're going to have to type them into the chat, and then Mike will will announce the questions on that. But for those of you that are here in person, we'll take your questions live. So with that, we're going to start. We also have our friends here from the Utah Geological Survey. We partner with the Utah Geological Survey on a lot of groundwater studies, and they just completed the groundwater study for the Pahvant Valley. And behind me, I have Greg and Paul, and they are going to present after this introduction about the study and the results of the study. Then we're going to have Jim Reese will present on what a groundwater management plan looks like in statute, just so that you have an idea of what the steps are. Then we're going to share with you the current policy, water right policies for the area, our current work as we're getting this information out to you, and then the next steps. And then we'll have comments and questions. The thing to be aware of, nothing is going to happen tonight. Nothing's going to happen tomorrow, or probably in a year from now. But the biggest thing that we need to do tonight is to get comments from the folks that are in the valley. And we're going to be asking for those that may be interested in serving on a committee to work through this. We're not going to do it ourselves. You guys are going to help us. And so we'll be looking for some volunteers that will help us on a committee that are willing to then communicate to others in the valley. So that's kind of what the objectives that we have. And with that, we're going to jump into the study. Greg.
All right. Mike, can you hear me on there? Cool. All right, let me switch the slides. All right. Is that visible online? It's not up there? No? It's on your computer right now. Do I need to share to a certain screen, Mike?
Sure, Jim. I'm not sure what happened here. Oh. Great. All right. You guys been seeing anything this whole time?
Yeah.
This was up till switch to his phone.
Let's try this.
Yeah, unplug and replug it. There we go. Let's see if that works. Okay, thank you. All right, so my name is Greg Gavin, lead author on the Groundwater Pahvant Valley groundwater study. My second author is Paul Inkenbrandt right here. Also, we have in the room is Trevor Schlossnagel, who also wrote the report. Rebecca Molinari is not present right now. She is fading out of working with us at the UGS. But that is the team who is currently here. All right, so this is the general outline of how I'm going to go ahead and form this talk. I will take the first half and Paul will take the second half. So I'll go over the background, where it is, and then the observed impacts that we've seen throughout the valley. Paul will take over for the possible drivers of those impacts, and then go into our calculations for our budget, changes in storage, and so on. All right, so this is the general statewide boundary for the study area. It includes everywhere from McCormick down to Kanash, in the east, the Pahvant mountain range watershed, and then the Crickets out in the west. Up in the north, we're terminating it just south of Deseret Butte. If you see a straight line there, and I'll show you in the next slide, that is from a hydrologic unit code boundary as defined by the United States Geological Survey. And then the southern boundary is the northern extent of the Black Rock Desert. So Black Rock Volcano, North and Twin Peaks out there. So this is a zoomed in view. The pink polygon in the center is the superficial extent of the volcanics that make up the central portion of the valley. The Cinders, Tabernacle Hill, Pahvant Butte, those sorts of things. That plays a crucial role for the general aquifer system throughout the entire valley. For the most part, we focused our efforts on the eastern portion of the valley. It's where the majority of the population of the valley live. It's where the majority of the industry lives. However, we did visit wells and other hydrologic curiosities out to the west, so we could sample, measure depths of groundwater and that sort of thing. But as most of you know, there's not much in the western portion west of the volcanics out there. All right, so what's the motivation behind this, right? Pahvant Valley is extremely important agriculturally to the state of Utah. Miller County ranks second in production and sales for the entire state. So there's no discounting the overall economic impact that you all have for the entire state. There are measured declines in groundwater elevation over time throughout the valley. From about the mid-1930s until the present day, that data is recorded and measured by the United States Geological Survey. It's open for record. A lot of you may be aware of monitor wells on your property. There's also concerns about land subsidence, primarily because there's precedent for this in neighboring valleys just to the south. But we were able to document observations of subsidence in the valley, which we'll show you some pictures of in just a little bit. Another primary concern as well is the downstream discharge point for the valley is represented as Clear Lake Wildlife Management Area. Clear Lake, in addition to our well logs or well elevations for the area, has a long period of record for flows at the lake. And so we're able to kind of look at what flows look like over time, look at what groundwater elevations look like over time. And then also, last but not least, we want to make sure that we're going to maintain the health and well-being of our aquifer systems within the state, so that way generations of Utahns can take advantage of this resource and continue onwards. All right, so this is a simplified block diagram of kind of the general hydrogeology, so the subsurface groundwater movement of Pahvant Valley. So this is looking to the northeast from the southwest. And in general, groundwater flows, I mean, everyone knows, water flows from up high to down low. So we're recharging these systems, snowfall up in the high mountain watersheds, up in the Pahvant Range primarily, to a lesser extent in the Canyon Mountains, and to an even lesser extent in the Crickets. But for the most part, the lion's share is coming from the Pahvant Range. We're treating Clear Lake as the terminal endpoint for this region. We're doing so because looking at well logs in the northwestern portion of the valley, we see huge extents of clay out there. Massive thick clays, over 1,000 feet thick, coming straight from it's juxtaposed right against the volcanics right there. So the volcanics are highly transmissive. They're moving lots of water through the system. And then that just hits that clay wall and ends right there. And for the most part, we're seeing recharge from the alluvial aquifer fans. So this is going to be direct infiltration from streams, precipitation, right on this fan where town is sitting. And that typically happens in the spring, as you all know, but we also see big monsoon events and that sort of thing. The volcanics are primarily recharged from direct infiltration to the aquifer system. As you guys know out there, the cinders, there's not much in the way of soil formation on top of that stuff. And so any water that falls on top of that, any snow that melts on top of that is going to directly infiltrate right down into that volcanic aquifer. All right, so you may or may not be aware, there's precedent for a lot of work in this valley. This is the first study published by the United States Geological Survey in cooperation with the state of Utah in 1911. So Oscar Meinzer here essentially performed a comprehensive inventory of all hydrologic assets in the valley, any spring, seep, lake, pond, stream, all that stuff, and really kind of laid the groundwork for why this valley is so important. Next, Dennis really documented the large artesian region in the flow oil area, documenting artesian flow and wells in the top rants of 600 GPM. So the flow oil area, you know, once wells were tapped into that region, you know, people understood the importance that that represented for the state. All right, next, Ralph Maurer, who lived in the area for quite some time, performed a lot of important work with regards to seepage in the aquifer system, but he also drew direct correlations between pumpage in the valley and flows at Clear Lake. And then the last study that was performed that some of you may remember was published in 1990 by the United States Geological Survey. And they were the first to kind of provide an updated groundwater budget for the valley, in addition to kind of give the water users of the valley an idea of what current pumping rates could mean for groundwater decline, what changes in management of the Central Utah Canal might mean for water users from McCormick, Greenwood, Pahvant, and the flow districts. All right, so I'm going to start with impacts here. So I'm going to start at Clear Lake. I'm going to start at the down gradient side, the end of the stream, if you will. So Clear Lake, like I said earlier, is the only known naturally occurring discharge point for the valley. The Beaver River historically had flowed through the valley in the western portion, but as many of you know, it's completely consumed between Beaver Valley, Minersville Reservoir, and the Milford Valley, so it no longer flows in the western portion. Clear Lake is fed by the Ice Springs basalt, so that's essentially from the cinders all the way down to Clear Lake itself. And it's also an ecologically important region for the state. It's a migratory bird flyover stop, but also represents an area for recreation. You know, maybe you're hunt waterfowl or pheasant or anything like that. So there's been major changes to, you know, visitation at Clear Lake, flows at Clear Lake, and that sort of thing. So I'll kind of touch on that right now. All right, so the left tile is a picture taken in August 30th of 2022. That's the inflow channel to the measurement point at Clear Lake. And then the middle tile is after our big water year in the winter of 2023. So this was actually, well, this was taken in 2024, but flows increased after that really big water year. There's a state conservation species at Clear Lake called the least chub. And so it's a way to kind of, you know, take the temperature, the health and well-being of certain ecosystems across the state. And so this is just one of the little ways that we can kind of, you know, utilize these endpoints, whether they be flow at Clear Lake, water levels in the valley, as kind of utilize these things as canaries in the coal mine, if you will. So this is a hydrograph of flows at Clear Lake. This is volumetric flow for an entire water year. And as you can see from the 1960s on the far left side of the graph until, you know, about the mid 1980s, flows are pretty stable at Clear Lake, around 15,000 acre feet per year. We see a huge spike in the very wet 1980 water years, upwards of almost 60,000 acre feet in total flow at Clear Lake, which is a lot. A somewhat short period of stability again in the mid 1990s, and then a slow but steady decline in flows at Clear Lake from the mid 1990s until the current day. That's not to say without peaks and valleys along the way. you can see large water years in there, drought periods in there, all that sort of thing. But on the whole, from about the mid-1990s until the current day, we're seeing a reduction in flow at Clear Lake of about 500 acre-feet per year. So 1 year, 500 acre-feet less flow past that partial flume, and then the following year, 500 acre-feet less, and so on and so forth. Until now, you know, the DWR in cooperation with the Division of Water Rights are measuring a couple hundred acre-feet of water flowing past that point, when historically it was tens of thousands. And to move on, we're looking at water levels in the area as well. So this is a USGS long-term monitor well and eastern flow well. This actually has the longest period of record of any well in the valley. Where period of record starts in the 1930s all the way to the current day. And we can see relatively periods of stable water levels until about the 1950s. Then we see a marked decline in water levels. Again, a huge spike in the 1980s, and then an obvious decline until the current day. And of note, this is another, you know, like I said, it's the longest period of record monitor well that the USGS monitors within the entire valley. And during the study, the depth of groundwater dropped below the bottom of casing for the first time in the period of record. So we have flows ceasing at Clear Lake. We have depths of water going below casing in eastern flow well. So these are just kind of to paint the picture of, these are impacts that we're seeing across the valley.
Well, is that?
The monitor well, this is the number right here in the central portion. I want to say, I can't remember what street it's on.
Where is it, the location?
Oh, on the road. Oh,
Just east of flow up. Just east of flow up.
on like, I mean, I can get the road for you if you want, which road it's on.
You said well.
Yeah. But I mean, if you pull this up on the United States Geological website, it'll show you exactly where it's located on their map. So. All right. What we did as well is we performed a comprehensive water level campaign across the valley. We synchronized these campaigns with the USGS so that we were not duplicating wells that they're measuring, so that we can measure a greater extent of groundwater levels across the entire valley. So we did this in the spring of 2022. The last when they did it was in 1986. And so this heat map on the right-hand side shows the change in depth of groundwater throughout the entire valley. The table on the right-hand side shows you decline rates and averages for each district. I want to point out the districts were defined hydrologically and hydrogeologically in the mid-1940s by Oscar Meinzer. And so he dispelled those different districts out, and that's how they're broken out. Hopefully they help you geographically orient yourselves in the valley. We see some of the greater declines in depth of groundwater up in the McCormick area, wells adjacent to the Central Utah Canal. Paul will speak on that a little bit more. As many of you may know, Central Utah Canal stopped delivering water into the Pahvant Valley at the end of the water year in 1988. And so on average, we're seeing declines of 26 feet, but locally, they could be much more than that. All right, so what are some of the impacts of these declines in groundwater level? If we're bringing that groundwater level down, we are desaturating sediments in the subsurface, and those sediments could be clays, sands, silts, gravels. That pore pressure from that water pushing out on those clays or sands, once that pore pressure is removed, then those sediments can then compact upon themselves. And so we can measure this using satellites. There's a network of satellites that circumnavigate the globe, and we can also document this with our red herrings like floating well pads, cracked well pads, earth fissures, and things like that. What we observed here were cracked and floating well pads. Earth fissures are down south and have been documented down there. And the way this works is it's no different than a pile on a dock, right? If you drive a pile in a dock in a lake, it's supported by sediments down deep. And so when we have dewatering of sediments in the higher portion of the aquifer system, and then those upper sediments compact upon themselves, that leaves the upper portion of the well casing exposed.
Are those all caused by those decompressing, or them maybe
faults in how wells structured and drilled to start with, gravel pack or
You have reason to believe
developed in them correctly?
that's a good point, and that well construction could potentially, but
Well, pump sand and stuff out, that they sink, the gravel sinks, they leave a cement pad
right.
up in the air, but doesn't necessarily mean that the groundwater is going down in that area.
No, I understand.
A lot of that is construction of additions not developed.
Correct. I mean, no doubt you guys have all seen poorly constructed wells in your lifetime. However, yes. Oh, sorry. For those online, an individual in the meeting brought to light the fact that there could potentially be subsidence in these regions due to localized faulty or poor well construction. And so that's what I was speaking to in the last couple minutes. So if we're using these satellites that are circumnavigating the globe, they're revisiting those locations multiple times per year, measuring their distances from the Earth's surface. And so we can gain or understand rates of subsidence in these areas, not local to just one particular well pad that may exhibit surficial evidence of this. And so this heat map in the center is a 6-year time period throughout the valley. And I'll go in more depth in this if this is a little confusing, along with a couple smoking guns of a cracked well pad and a floating well pad. All right, and so in this one, warmer colors indicate greater subsidence. Greener colors indicate areas where there's been little to no subsidence. And so in this 6-year period, subsidence is around 5 to 6 inches in total compaction or subsidence reduction in ground elevation at these locations. And so this next one's going to be a time lapse of the entire valley. Again, warmer colors are going to be total subsidence. So this is going to be 216 passes of these satellites over a period of 9 years, I want to say. The white portions that represent, the ag districts in the valley, those are scrubbed from this analysis because we have hay growing, we have hay cuts. And so we're not going to measure the top of the hay and then count that as a subsidence point, right? So we're counting the areas in between, areas of native vegetation, playa, surfaces that are unchanged over time. And so I'm going to call out 3 of the districts so you guys can get a good understanding of what it looks like from north to south. And I'll start in the southern Greenwood area. So this is Greenwood. This is just south of the highway that kind of cuts up there. And this is a period from 2015 until late 2024. The blue represent the total number of passes of the satellite here. And the orange represents the average rates of decline. And so over a 9-year period, the average rate of decline that we're seeing in southern Greenwood is on the order of 1.5 inches per year. Total subsidence in that is looking around just under 15 inches in 9 years. So it's about 15 inches of total subsidence in southern Greenwood at that point. And if you notice on the blue dots, you can see like yearly waves on there, and it's going to become much more apparent in the next slide. But that'll be your yearly recharge of the aquifer system and then the yearly pumpage out of the aquifer system. If you look around 2019, you see a big spike. Maybe you remember a big water year in 2019, right? All right, so this is flow L, so central flow L here. Again, this is, so the timescales changed on this one. It's not from 2015 until 2024. It's just from 2020 until 2024, so a 4-year period. And the average rate of decline in central flow L is 1.57 inches per year. So total for this period of time is just under 10 inches of subsidence from 2020 until late 2024. And this is much more apparent. You can see those yearly increases in recharge and then pumpage, and then recharge and then pumpage out of the aquifer system in this area. You can see a large increase during the 2023 big water year that was here. And then finally, I'll move down to Meadow, which exhibits a slightly different signal. So from 2015 until 2024, you see a pretty consistent rate of decline, but then around 2022, you really see an increase in subsidence in Meadow. And so we can interpret that as we've drawn that groundwater elevation below maybe a clay layer or a silt, someplace that was reliant a little bit more than just well cemented or well oriented gravels, so that when that was dewatered, then it compacted even faster. All right, and so we're going to move into the driver's section, and I will pass it along to Paul.
Okay, so we wanted to get at why we're seeing this declines in spring flow, declines in water levels, and try to figure out what we can measure to understand why we're seeing these declines. One of the things, of course, we looked at was the amount of precipitation. We definitely had some drought years recently, despite the good recent years as well. And this is data on the left-hand side showing a snowtail station up in the Pahvant range. So it's been recording since 1985, and we see general increase from there to 2005, though it's several ups and downs in between, and then a slight general decrease from 2005 to 2020, but no real clear signal coming off of that. There's definitely been drier years, as we can see around 2020, 2019, but no smoking gun as far as we can tell. The plot on the right side shows the change in groundwater levels across the valley over time. And so we can compare here. And like we saw with the spring, from 1960 to about 1984, we had relatively little change in groundwater level across the valley. Then we get a bump from the high water years of the 80s. And then from 1990 on, we see a gradual decline upwards of 20 feet across the valley. And so part of how precipitation is playing a role here is when there's not enough water from streams and from the precip, we have to pump more groundwater in response. And because of that, there's a relationship between precip and pumping, with about a 1-year lag between that precipitation and the pumping that we have going on in the valley. And so the precipitation here is shown in red on this plot, and well pumping is shown in blue. And you can see as precipitation goes up, pumping goes down, like in the mid-1980s. And when precipitation goes down, pumping generally increases. It's not a perfect one-to-one relationship, but you can definitely see the connection between the two. And there's other variables likely influencing pumping as well. Here's a look at groundwater pumping for the valley from mid-1940s to 2021. 2021 is the most recent record that the U.S. Geological Survey makes available on their website. And so you can see a ramping up of pumping from 1950 to about 1960. It's generally stable, hanging out right around 80,000 acre-feet per year from 1960 to about 1980. And then we get those big years in the 80s, and then it starts ramping up from 1990 to the end of the record there, 2021. In 2021, there's about 149,000 acre-feet of pumping for that year. And the general increase, the average increase from 1990 to present is about 1,900 acre-feet per year. And so, there's not a bunch of necessarily new wells coming on over that period of time, and not a bunch of new area being irrigated. So it makes you wonder, like, why are we seeing a fairly significant increase in pumping. We can also look at the relationship between the amount of well pumping and spring flow at Clear Lake Spring. And what you'll notice, it's generally flatline. There's very little change in spring flow relative to pumping in between about 60 and 85,000 acre feet per year in pumping. So, you know, it's hanging out right around 15,000 acre feet per year of spring flow in that range of pumping. And then once you exceed that, your spring flow starts dropping off. Then this is a similar plot, and it's comparing pumping to groundwater level. And so the zero line for groundwater level right here, and we can compare that to the general amount of pumping. And if you, to exceed that, to start to get groundwater level decline, you're shooting around in between beyond 80,000 acre feet per year. And that's when you start seeing declines in that general water level across the valley. So what are some of these drivers? Groundwater pumping obviously plays a role. The end of the Central Utah Canal was definitely an important player. It was coincident with the end of the 80s, the big time in the 80s, but it was turned off. And before it was turned off, it was flowing. What was the total flow on Central Utah in the late 80s, Greg? Total flow, diversion. Do you remember? So about 100 CFS diverted from the severe, and significant amounts, upwards of 35 CFS lost as seepage in that canal, which was recharging the aquifer up there, and especially in the McCormick and Greenwood areas. And that was about 14,000 acre feet per year of recharge contributed there. So there's definitely some connection between the significant declines we've seen in the McCormick area and the Greenwood areas in groundwater level relative to that Central Utah Canal. However, we're also seeing groundwater level declines in Flowell and Meadow, and so there's definitely other factors at play here. Part of the reason we may be seeing an increase in pumping is because we're seeing an increase in the amount of evapotranspiration across the valley. From 2000 to 2021, based on satellite estimates of evapotranspiration, we've seen an increase of upwards of 45 inches more per year, or more total over that time period. And so a total of about 20,000 acre feet from 2000 to 21 change or increase in consumptive use. And so this can likely be attributed to denser, greener, healthier crops, which is a good thing, but that means that in turn, the plants are gonna evapotranspire more and use more water in turn. So higher yield, but also more water use. And here's an example plot, and we saw this in several places across the valley. The measure of the chart is a measure of greenness at this field circled here, 1007. And we can see a switch in the greenness around 2005, where you go from sparse greenness, seasonal greenness, where it looks like it's dependent on the seasonal availability of water. So maybe a good water year, you have more greenness, bad water year, not so much. But then you switch over in about 2005 and you see dense, level greenness for each year, the same amounts. And so it seems like a significant transition in irrigation type and maybe the type of water being used, right? So there may be more supplemental groundwater for 2005 on, or definitely better irrigation. And so this is something we've seen across the West, is this efficiency paradox, where you switch to a pivot and you from flood irrigation, and it is more efficient in terms of how much water you're losing from your spray or from evaporation from the water, but you're getting higher consumptive use. So the plants are using more water because you have denser, greener crops and more crops, so higher yield in return. And so, and you get less recharge to the aquifer from applying less water. And so it's kind of a trade-off in terms of efficiency. Okay, now I should talk a little bit about the budget that we calculated. And for this, I got to get a little bit technical. We have two kind of aquifers in this area. One is unconfined and the other confined. And so a confined aquifer is like pressurized with clay layers, covering clay layers. And an unconfined aquifer doesn't have that pressurized system, no confining clay layers. And the amount of water that they release when you pump out of them is very different. And they can create the same amount of groundwater change. And so an unconfined aquifer, you pump and you see this much drawdown in a well, and you get a lot more water out of it, for that amount of drawdown. But if you're pumping out a confined aquifer, you see the same amount of drawdown, but you get a lot less water out of it. And so we had to account for that when looking at these numbers. And what's interesting is that an aquifer can go from confined to unconfined. If you draw down below a clay layer, it's no longer confined, and so how it's storing water changes. And we had to account for that. And so we looked very carefully at the amount of confinement of the valley over time. It matches the other trends we were showing. And we can compare the 1986 confinement. So in this teal area, you have more flowing wells and more of a confined aquifer. And then that area is reduced as water level declines. So this allowed us to get a general, using our estimates of aquifer properties and groundwater levels over time, we're able to get at the amount of total groundwater storage change, the amount of volume. The cumulative volume didn't change too much from 1960s to mid 1980s. And tracking with the groundwater level declines, we see significant total losses, cumulative losses in the Pahvant aquifer system, upwards of 1 million acre feet from 1990 to present. We took a close look at the 2022 budget. That's when we were doing most of our field work, but we also looked at other water years, but we did a really close examination in 2022. And so these are the amounts that we got for total pumping, 145,000 acre feet in 2022, which is similar to the 2021 value I showed you earlier. The total amount of water lost from springs, including evaporation from Clear Lake and Meadow and shallow groundwater, all of that amounts to about 5,000 acre feet per year, with a total discharge from the valley of about 150,000 acre feet for 2022. The storage change we saw that year was about 80,000 acre feet loss, and we got about 70,000 acre feet of recharge. Then that's the residual between discharge and change in storage. Yes?
How much water is actually being pumped?
That's a great question. And so we have to measure a lot of, we base it off of the reported values that water rights gets, but we also have to estimate based on the wellhead configuration, the number of sprinklers, the irrigation configuration. And so we got to go well by well across the valley and think about the flow of each one. And some of them we have to estimate in between a reasonable range because it's impossible to measure the amount of discharge. So
Some kids might put on 9 gallons to the acre, some 5.
Mhm.
All the wells are not metered.
That's correct. Yep. So let me repeat the question for the online. So the question was, how do we know how much water is being pumped from the wells? And some wells could be putting out a lot more water than others for specific pivot. And so we measure what wells we can, and then the other ones we base that off of a general statistical distribution, and we have to estimate the ones that we aren't able to measure. But we measure everything we can and figure out what pumping we can, and then compare that to previous estimates, look at power usage of pumps, and compare that to the horsepower rating on the pump and try to think about every variable that we can to account for it the best way possible. But you're right, it's not perfect, and we report errors, and that's what this standard deviation numbers on the side is kind of our guess at the amount of error associated with that estimate, because we want to try to be as transparent as we can on how much error our numbers have. So does that clarify?
I don't think that's a fair way to figure whatever.
And I definitely agree with you. I think well, we need the benefit. I think we would all benefit from better measurement, but we work with what we have to work with at the moment. Okay, so that's 2022. Here are 2016 to 2022, and the big takeaways here is, you know, the amount of discharge is hanging out above over 100,000 acre feet per year from 2016 to 2022. The amount of storage change varies, and that depends on how much recharge we got. In 2017, we had a decent water year. 2019, we had a good water year, and so we got a net increase in storage and more recharge than we would in a drier year like 2020, 2021. And so on average, we're seeing about 80,000 acre feet for recharge and a general storage change of a decrease of about 70,000 acre feet. So the general summary here is there's more than 60,000 acre foot increase in pumping from 1990 to present, increasing about 1,900 acre feet per year. There's 14,000 acre feet lost from the previous diversion of Central Utah Canal, which stopped in 1988. And obviously in dry years, we get less recharge and more pumping. And so it's a double whammy. We're not getting recharge to the aquifer, but we're also pumping out of it. The impacts that we're seeing on the system is a loss in storage, significant loss in storage, Clear Lake drying up, average across the valley 26-foot decline with larger declines in some areas, and a maximum groundwater level decline of 163 feet in the McCormick area, and upwards of 15 inches of subsidence in the past 10 years. And so now Greg and I can field any additional questions you have. Greg? Yes, sir.
Going back to the subsidence, do you have an estimate of is the subsidence restricted the amount of storage per how much of that is 1%, 10%? Do you state for subsidence? Can you pumping it current rate or
Yeah. So once an aquifer compacts, it permanently loses some of its storage. You reduce some of its ability to store water once you compact it. Now, the aquifer has a little springiness to it, as we saw, especially, so there's, oh, sure, thank you. Yeah, so the question was, how much storage, and so you're talking about ability to store or a loss of?
Yeah, I'm curious, have we lost storage capacity?
Have we lost storage capacity because of subsidence? We don't know how much. We just hired a specialist to help us look at hazards across the state, and one of the things she's really good at is estimating those kind of values. We didn't report that in our study, but you do get permanent loss of aquifer storage when you have subsidence. And so that's definitely a concern. Yeah, we don't have an amount of storage lost. And you, even after you remediate water level decline issues, sometimes you can continue to see subsidence because it takes some time for some of those clays and stuff to dewater. And so it'll continue to compact, and it'll take time before you can see a response in that change.
This is for somewhere else, so. To a lower level, different aquifer, a lower level.
Well,
Because a lot of the wells, when they're replaced,
They get drilled deeper.
Deeper, but you actually get a stronger well than the original well. With less water.
Once you,
Part of that too, in fact, a lot of the older wells, if you go in and TV them and look at them, you've lost perforation, you've lost the ability for water to come into a well, the aquifer is recharged. So you may have a good water year and not see any change in your aquifer or what your static water level is in spring to summer and winter. And a lot of that is due to when you pull the pump out, there's no area for the water to get into the well. If you're monitoring the well that has no pump in it, too, it could bridge over and keep water from coming in. Water level steps down. I have years of documentation too of the Pahvant water. What it is, most all of these wells.
yeah,
But it is, there's a lot of other factors besides just, that or pumping, because again, it's.
let me try to summarize your comment.
You don't have any wells that have been drilled, so there has to be wells drilled. But
There's been replacement wells, but I'm talking about adding or taking away.
there's been a lot.
Yeah, there's been deepening and replacement wells for sure. So,
It's basically the same thing.
so your comment is basically saying that there's other things to account for when looking at water level in a well. I'm just trying to repeat this for the online and make sure I'm clear.
So there's a lot of water in the well, you can go in and rework them. You can go in and straighten, clean and brush the casing, you go in and reperforate them, you can do things to open your perforation back up and bring your water table up. Because it's not getting in the well.
Yeah, and that's something we take into account with our static water levels and understanding the well construction and the packer material if it exists in the screened intervals. But overall, there will be water deeper down, but there's a limit to that unconsolidated valley fill aquifer. And the further down you go, the less there is, and the more you compact. And if you ever try to recharge that up all the way full like it used to be, you won't be able to store as much water in it as you used to be able to.
That also changes area to area.
It does, and the aquifer properties change from area to area.
Smart, there are all your measurements done in wells themselves, or do you got, is there a different way to measure your water levels, or do you just use the wells?
Depth to water, most of the historical measurements have been done by the U.S. Geological Survey, but yeah, all of our water level measurements are done with wells. There's some geophysical techniques, but I think measuring the depth to water in wells is probably your best representation of that groundwater level.
Can you pull up that graph of that old well and flow well, east flow well? So how much lower is the lowest point right now versus in the 1960s on this graph? And
So
it looks pretty similar to me.
yeah, well, right now we had that big water year, and so it got all the way up to 74. But what you can, and I should have showed the 2023. The well is about 90 feet deep, and so it dropped below the bottom depth of that. So the very bottom of this chart in 2022.
The very bottom that we're showing right now, is that lower than in the 1960 on that graph? It looks like to me it dropped really similar to the same in 1960.
It definitely got down low in the 1964 era, but it didn't go dry. Otherwise, they probably would have discontinued. They have a standard, and they almost shut this well off for good. But since it has such a long period of record now, and it's kind of important.
What would you say in 1964, the difference that's on that graph right there versus right now? What's the difference in the water level of 1964 and 2024 or 2022?
2022 and 1964, probably about 10 feet. Well, we don't know, right? Because it dropped below the bottom of the well. So it's deeper, more than 10 feet in 2022. In 2024 and 2023, we saw it pop back up. And so you can see on this zoom in chart that there's not a record right here for November 2023. And so they took out their monitoring equipment for a short period of time because it went dry. And yeah, but it did pop back up from that good water year a little bit to about 76 feet. So, you know, even higher than that 64 time in that. But that's, it's important to note that this well is measuring both spring levels and fall levels. And you're going to see a fluctuation. So it's kind of the average of those right in the middle of that, or the top end of that for your spring levels. That's what we would consider the static.
Yeah, it just looks like to me it's really similar. I mean, within a few feet.
And this is just one well of
If I know what well that is, it hasn't been pumped for my whole life.
that that's, you know, we try real hard to avoid measuring depth to water in wells that have been pumped recently because we want good data, good representation of the system.
Thank you.
Question. What about the Central Utah Water Project? Nobody ever said anything about it. Designed, laid out, and surveyed, 1949. Abandoned in the early 70s. When we mentioned that, that would have put a whole lot of water in this Pahvant Valley.
Yeah, and that's kind of an administrative level thing. Oh yeah, thank you, Greg. So his question was about the Central Utah project that was designed in the 40s and yep. And so whatever became of that, and that's an
I can answer that.
Oh, great. That's more of a water rights issue.
Central Utah projects concept of the Superior Basin.
You can answer some questions if you want.
Yeah, the Central Utah project concept for the Sevier River Basin was to bring water from Spanish Fork Canyon, dump it into Sevier Bridge, and exchange that water upstream to Paiute Reservoir. Okay. At the time, Central Utah would have been one of the canal companies that may have benefited from that scheme. In the early to mid 90s, Millard County chose to get out of that project. There were several reasons. Probably the leading driver of that was the environmental impacts. They would have had to been paid by the river to go through with that. But that was a political decision that was done in the 90s. Probably the right decision. You look at what's happened since then. Water goes to M&I. That's very expensive water. And whether it would have continued to be here or not, I mean, you could speculate, but that's why Central Utah project was not completed.
We have our emails on this PowerPoint, and we'll make it available to the public. Our report is also published on the Utah Geological Survey webpage. I welcome if you come up with additional questions, and I'm happy to field more now, but if you come up with additional questions, feel free to email us. We're happy to answer. So when we did our, so the USGS does most of the long-term monitoring, and I don't know what their total number is, but it's more than 60 or what? Well, here we have a. Yeah.
Is that monitored year round or just?
No, just in the spring. Let me see if I can find that. Oh, so it was higher in the 60s and it was right around 80 in the 60s, and now it's dropped down to about 30. And so that's just for Pahvant Valley, not Millard County as a whole. So the question was, how many wells do we monitor? We did a water level measurement campaign in 2022, spring of 2022, to do a comparison between now and 1987 levels, but the USGS does most of the long-term monitoring. And so we use their data for the long-term records. No, most of the monitoring wells are strictly monitoring, or they weren't. They're done in the spring before the pumps are turned on.
So they have no idea. Do they have any idea what the wells look like from year to year?
So you're asking, is there? Do they know what the seasonal variation is? So like.
Do they have any idea what those monitoring wells look like inside of the water and make sure that the whole benefit of any recharge coming into that well?
I mean, I don't think they're TVing the wells, if that's
what I'm.
Yeah.
Because they will change drastically from year to year.
no, these are, it's obviously they're long-term wells, but they're wells around regions that,
What size of well? 40?
anywhere from, old 6-inch to 18-inch casing, So there's a million of them that aren't abandoned out there. And so, yes.
So the number of wells, the number of wells went from 80 down to.
I was going to mention that because I think for you here, and I don't know how it looks online, but the right-hand axis of the depth to groundwater change chart, for us in the room, it goes 80, 72, 64, so down all the way down to 0. And so, yeah, roughly in the 1960s, they were monitoring around 40 wells. And I'm sorry, they're monitoring around 80 wells. And now in the current day, it's around 35 wells from the USGS. And then we went and measured, I want to say, about 100 more throughout the valley. And like I said, during my portion, we purposely did not revisit the wells so that we could have a greater geographic spread.
We didn't look at the wells that they're monitoring year to year. We looked at wells outside of that. And then they still did a measurement that year too. So that way we can compare and see how, and most of the, most everything looked like it made sense, nice smooth curves, the wells nearby agreeing with each other. So it showed, it didn't show influence in terms of construction or differences in diameter for that water level map.
Sir.
Yeah, my question is basically, how big is our aquifer? Years ago, we had Las Vegas trying to take our water. And they said at that point, we have no idea whatsoever. We could have an ocean underneath us of an aquifer. It could be pockets. We don't understand how big. Is that technology changed? Do we now understand how big our aquifer is? And my second part of that is this study doesn't include part of the Pahvant Valley as I understand it. I lived in the west side of the county, but it said it didn't include Deseret or Delta or Hinckley or any of the rest of that area. Isn't that a part of the same aquifer? Or do we understand it? And that mirror reflection on that graph, well, that's one well. No wonder it's a mirror reflection. You pull water out, it's going to go up. This global satellite system you have, okay, it shows us more green. Well, it doesn't show the aquifer. My question, do we understand what the aquifer is, how big it is, how expansive it is? My well is 45 feet deep. Some of the guys with me, their wells are 400 feet deep. The same aquifer.
We should repeat. So the comment was, do we know the extent and size of the aquifer? There are concerns about, there being a fairly extensive aquifer, and is the area of Deseret and Delta and the areas to the north considered part of the same aquifer system? There's a mentioning of this plot here. And is that just one representation of one well? And this is the total pumping of the valley. And then that one well that we were showing was just an example, but we also looked at water levels across across the valley over time. So not just one well, but we just use one well as an example just to show the hard data on that. In terms of the extent of the aquifer and the amount of water left in it,
I think total volumetric storage is what you're getting at, and that is still a question mark there.
but it's important to note that there's a general net deficit right now. So there's more being taken out than being put in. And that's affecting the structure and the ability for that underground reservoir to store that water.
And then I think it's worth noting too that the quality of the water as you increase with depth decreases as well. And so you're going to have saltier, poorer water that in some instances is unable to be, you can't irrigate with that high TDS water.
That's not true in all areas.
I'm sorry?
If you go west of the Nosh,
Mm-hmm.
west of 50 feet or less, the water is almost unpumpable. It eats pipe, you're.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, some of the world has been drilled away within the last 10 years down there. 400 or 500 feet deep. The water quality is good.
Yeah, so the comment was
It's really good.
in the Kanash area, even the shallow wells have relatively poor water quality. And that's true. And that's something we put in the report but didn't cover in this presentation is Greg did a complete analysis of water chemistry across the valley. And the Kanash area does have higher dissolved solids.
Well, electric heat, but only water. Electric heat, that's a surface well. Quality that water in those wells.
It's more speaking.
It's not as good as the deeper wells that they've replaced those wells.
And I still have to get back to the.
It's not.
Yeah, the previous question, I still wanted to address the connection between Delta and Deseret, and then I'll get to water quality, general water quality trends. So most of the area north of Clear Lake, as you get closer to Deseret, it's very clay rich. And as you get towards the center of a lot of these valleys, you get more and more clay. And so there is some small amount of water moving up towards the Sevier River, some small amount of groundwater level, groundwater volume, but it's a small amount. It's at most a couple thousand acre feet, but it's not, and we're already covering a massive area here, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort to do this as right as we can. And so we didn't want to sacrifice the quality of the study. I think that the Delta and Deseret area warrants a look, but it's hard to combine. You're getting close to, a very large section of the state once you start lumping all of that together.
Is that the same water?
No, I think the end of the flow path, the groundwater flow path would be the Sevier River. So that's kind of the main cutoff, but you're contributing from this system, maybe, anywhere from 200 to 2,000 acre feet per year up into that aquifer system to the north. But it's, I think a lot of the water recharging into the area of the Delta region, that's being recharged from a different area for the most part.
The consumptive use slide where you showed the time lapse with the red circles. Are other practices factored into the math on that? I mean, you have input, soil health that could also increase the greenery rate. I'm just wondering.
Yeah, this is, so the question was, are other factors taken into consideration here? And what we're just looking at here is just the amount of, that we did two estimates. We looked at the amount of greenness across the region, and this is just one example. And then we looked at the amount of evapotranspiration across, and this is something we've seen across the West, is this increase in yield tied to an increase in efficiency. And so we're testing out even subsurface drip irrigation, which should be 100% efficient or close to it, where you have no evaporation coming from your irrigation. And so all of your evaporation should be tied to the plant. And that is an increase in efficiency if you don't, you have to taper your yield with that. Otherwise, you're going to have greater plant density, greater consumptive use. And so there, the amount of water applied to the same amount of area could end up being more because you have better crops, which just could be a good thing, but it has to be accounted for somehow.
Soil health got better through all the farming practices and stuff. That's not a true statement, probably.
You could have improved. So, I mean, you could have improved. There's lots of factors that can play into it, but at the end of the day, a healthier plant means more consumptive use. And so
Well, if your soil holds the water longer because your soil health is better because of farming practices, that should be a direct correlation with yields and plant health and greenness in that field. And so I would say that could be as big a factor as a lot of things we're talking about, because so many things have changed in our farming practices in that amount of time. You go back 15 years, we changed everything we do now. And that could lead to that. You're putting more compost, more nutrients in that soil, opening that up with better fertilizers so that soil can hold water and not use as much to give you a better crop.
it's still the plants. The soil is just part of that whole balance in that system. And so there's exchanges of water going on between the whatever the irrigation is, the groundwater system in some cases. And the soil is an important part of that whole system. And that's still water being exchanged between the surface and the ground there. And healthy plants, they're going to be healthier with good soil and good fertilizer, but healthier plants are going to grow more. They're going to increase in yield and increase in density. You'll have more plants, healthier plants, more leaves, more surface area, more transpiration from those plants in turn. And so that's water coming out of that soil water storage that would ultimately maybe have instead infiltrated but ultimately that is going into the air. That's consumptive use. And so, yeah, good. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's just something that needs to be accounted for. I think it's great to increase yield. I try to do that in my garden, but it has to be accounted for. And so I don't know how, it's not my place to say how that should be done, but that's my best guess at how, where's this water going and what's going on here. That's what we're trying to figure out. And we give you that information and then hopefully you all can make more informed decisions with it.
How do you factor in that if you're just, I know talking farms here, farmers, but how do you factor in if you got farmers who are doing everything they can do to have better yield, take better care of the water, be better stewards of the land and the water? People that are watering lawns, gardens, do you monitor any of that stuff? That water is being wasted.
Yeah, that's accounted for.
Are you monitoring, how do you monitor that where you can decide between, say, this guy may lose this or this guy may lose this, but they're going to keep that. They're wasting more water than these guys ever would.
I think that, we should be trying to manage the water as effectively as we can. Yeah, that's part of our, so this map here is looking at not just the fields throughout the valley, but anywhere water is being applied, including the cities, the golf course, everywhere. And so we're looking across the board at changes in the amount of consumptive use over time. And those are important. And I think we should account for those and think about those things.
So I'm going to jump in here.
Thanks, Tracy.
Just real quick. So I am being, watching the time to be sensitive for you guys as well as us. We're happy to stay. I think we're getting locked out of the building at 8. But we'll stay for some questions. But the dialogue that we're having right now with these questions that you have on ag optimization, metering, I think came up. Some of these other discussions that you guys are having. These are the types of things that we will dive into in depth as we move forward with this process. So we're happy to answer more of these questions. These guys are, but I'd like to get the other content that we brought to you today, and then let's answer some of these other questions if we can kind of keep moving.
Please
with that.
send us
So-
emails and call us, and I want to help. Share and try to be as transparent as I can about our understanding of the system. We're here to help you understand what's going on and our best understanding. So I really want to help anybody who has any questions. And even though we have to stop right now, it doesn't mean we have to stop talking about it.
And we won't. And so the questions, when we have our last slide, we do have a way that you can submit questions to us. We'll post them on this website so that everybody will see the questions and the answers. So I know the dialogue one-on-one, helps, but I think also making sure everybody has the same questions and the same answers is going to be helpful too. So we'll do that. But you guys, thank you to both of you. And I'm going to have Jim talk about groundwater management plans now. Guys.
Okay, I'll start over. No, so the UGS, they do a great job for us doing these studies. The study's brand new, and we're still digesting it. We're just getting into it, understanding what it means. There's a lot of information in there about water quality, a lot of the things that you guys have asked questions about. When it comes to what our office does, there's probably a limited number of factors and information that really drive what we do. Okay, and so I'm going to talk about that. And what I'm going to talk about are what we call groundwater management plans. Okay, and it is the way the state engineer has the role in the state to distribute the available water. Right, on a surface water system, we do that by priority. The earliest water rights get first dibs at the water, right? And then followed by the next person in line until there's no more water. With groundwater, we follow the same principle with priority, but it's different. Groundwater is different. It doesn't flow down the stream and then moves on, right? It's sitting down there in this aquifer. The recharge is happening over years, decades, long time. And so it's a different animal. But that's what a groundwater management plan is for. Okay, so the legislation behind this was enacted in 2006. Since that legislation has come into play, we've formulated 3 groundwater management plans in the state. So if you're interested, it's 73-515 of the Utah Code. And like I said, this is what our office does to distribute groundwater, is to use a groundwater management plan. So what I want to go over is really not any kind of plan, what we're doing here or anything, just what are the steps? What do we do to do a plan? Okay. So our office does have the authority by statute to regulate groundwater withdrawals, right? To limit those withdrawals as needed, but it needs to be done in accordance with a plan that's been established following statute. Okay. There's 2 important definitions in statute that when it comes to groundwater management plans. Number 1, a critical management area. Okay. That's where a groundwater basin consistently, the withdrawals exceed the safe yield. Okay. Now we'll talk about safe yield in a second, but Paul and Gavin hinted at this, Paul and Greg, sorry. They hinted at that more water is being withdrawn than is recharging in this area. Okay. So this is definitely would fall under critical management area. Now, safe yield is it's a specific amount. It's amount of groundwater that can be withdrawn without exceeding the long-term recharge. Okay, so we need to understand what the long-term recharge is, and to also not unreasonably affect the basin's physical and chemical integrity, right? So we don't want to withdraw more water than is going to, significantly worsen water quality, or perhaps, there's a lot of discussion about subsidence. We don't want to limit the aquifer's ability to carry the water, right? The soil medium. Okay, so objectives of a groundwater management plan. Okay, so number 1, limit groundwater withdrawals to safe yield, and then to protect the physical integrity of the aquifer and protect water quality. That's the purpose of the plan. That's what the plan will be intended to do. Okay, so talking a little bit about safe yield. Like I said, recharge is kind of the starting point, right? We take a study from UGS that they do a lot of work, and it's not an easy task. And they estimate, okay, this is what the recharge is, and likely that is what the safe yield will be determined, that we'll work with for a groundwater management plan. Now, it could be less because of other factors, and so normally it's verified from a water budget, like was presented, where the inflows equals the outflows and the change in storage. So we look at the outflows, we look at how the storage changed, and then that tells us how much is recharging, and that gives us this safe yield. Okay, and going back, right, very first objective, limit groundwater withdrawals to safe yield. So that's what a plan is to do. It's a plan to how we're going to limit the withdrawals to that number, which is the amount of average recharge to the aquifer. An important thing is that when we do this plan, we have to use the provisions of, or the principles of prior appropriation, right? First in time, first in right, for the water. Okay. Now we can consider voluntary arrangements between water users. Okay, but only those that volunteer to participate in those arrangements are subject to those. Okay. And just some final points about this. Okay. So it's going to require a lot of scientific research and reporting. There have been several studies, and the UGS just completed an additional study. It's up to our office to review those and determine what an appropriate safe yield number will be. Okay, so sometime we're going to be working on that in the coming months. At some point, we'll be having further discussions with you all to, offer our suggestion, get your input, and hopefully come to some sort of understanding of what that number should be. But that objective of how much the withdrawal should be limited to. So there is, in the statute, there's a requirement for meetings and notice, right? We had to give notice to certain people. We had to advertise in the paper. We have to hold public meetings to address these, and we want to make sure that you all are involved. Like Teresa mentioned, forming a committee of water users would be a tremendous help to us, that so that we can come and have more focused discussions about the issues in the area. And then obviously your comments and suggestions are desperately wanted and needed to move this process forward. We've had great discussion tonight, lots of questions. Written comments work really well because we were able to review those and think about them and incorporate them into what we do for the plan. And then all water rights and uses are respected. There's no special treatment for domestic, different use types. Okay, that we as far as the state engineer's office goes, what we can do, we have to regulate by priority date strictly. Okay, and then at the end of all of the process of coming up with a plan, if there are people that are aggrieved by the plan that is eventually adopted, it is subject to judicial review. So you can appeal the plan to the courts and seek relief there if needed. So that covers what I wanted to talk about, and I'll answer some questions. Maybe I'd mention, I mentioned that 3 of these plans have been established since the codes have been enacted in 2006. So it's in the Beryl, Enterprise, Escalante Valley, in the Cedar City Valley, and then also in the Pahvant Valley recently this year. And so if you're interested, those, you might look at those to see kind of what, where those plans ended up.
Same plan on all of them?
Not
It's the same
exactly.
basic?
Not exactly, but they are quite similar, again, because the statute really focuses on what our office can do in terms of regulating the water, right? We need to come up with an amount that's the safe yield, and then we need to curtail
What did you do in those areas? I mean, what did you do in Pahvant?
Okay, for example, the question for those online that is what we did in Pahvant. So in Pahvant, in fact, it was the United States Geological Survey. They did a wonderful study, and we went through that. We went through a public process, met with local water users. We determined scientifically what this safe yield number was. It was, I don't remember the exact numbers offhand, but roughly they had to cut about 7,000 to 8,000 acre feet. They were over drawings about 8,000 acre feet per year, which percentage wise was probably about 25% or something. But what the plan did was establish that this is the safe yield, that amount, and then it laid out a gradual implementation. So I think there were 4 to 5 different future times where curtailment would occur. The first was like in about 15 years, and then about every 10 years after that, until withdrawals should be equal to the recharge.
What do they do to control that? They cut the wells back?
So, yeah, it's a good question. Yes, the question was, what did they do to control it? They cut their wells back. Nothing has been done yet, because like I said, the first curtailment is not for 15 years. Even the Beryl Enterprise plan it was established in the mid 2000s. The first curtailment that's supposed to occur there is not until 2030. So we actually haven't gotten to the point where we have to shake the stick.
Where does it run from? Is it from like Bear Valley Junction Buckhorn Flat to all of Iron County and.
It's basically,
Clear to Burl?
okay, so the question was about the extent of the Pahvant Valley. It goes from, yeah, the Buckhorn Flat area south to Summit, just before you kind of,
How many wells were monitored and which ones, what areas?
there's wells monitored throughout, and USGS did a,
You have addressed, I know it's a different area, but you know the difference in the water tables were, say, the Buckhorn Flat, the Pahvant compared to Upper Burl. I know most of the ones in the Buckhorn Flat because I monitored for the last 8 years and documented.
yeah,
That tells 29 wells.
Yeah. yeah, so there's a question about in the Pahvant Valley, kind of the difference between the Buckhorn Flat area and maybe the rest of the valley. And there was some concern, and this was something that was discussed heavily with the water users during the process, was whether or not they should be treated separately. In the end, the studies indicated that they're hydrologically connected throughout.
Okay, the drawdowns out in rural and the enterprise and stuff are so different than the Buckhorn Flat.
Oh, so the withdrawals out.
Those wells are plus or minus 2 feet. 29 of them that I've monitored for eight years are plus or minus is all either down 2 feet or up 2 feet in the last 8 years.
Yeah, I don't know for sure the specifics on those, but on those wells.
Groundwater management plan, you say that the valley is estimated 65 acre feet and is currently discharging 100,000 acre feet. With not having meters on every well, how can you determine that?
How can we determine?
How can you determine how much we're pumping out?
Well, we can tell by the studies, the amount of volume of water that's been withdrawn. Okay. Yeah.
I don't know how you could. I mean, before we implement this plan, I say you put meters on every well and come back to us 5 years later. And then give us the study.
Yeah, Teresa's going to talk about that. We definitely want meters everywhere.
Hey, go back to Pahvant for a second. Is Pahvant City going to lose water? Is all of the homes that were built in the last 40 years going to lose water?
It depends on where the Pahvant City's water rights fit within that priority. I don't remember offhand. I know.
Well, I think you're cutting them to 1950 the first time, right?
55.
1955. So everything newer than that loses water.
No, that's a little not newer. No, that's a good question. Domestic wells that were constructed after then, they do risk losing their
Domestic wells, is it homes?
homes, but if they have their own private well. Now, inside the municipality likely has water rights that are much senior that they have for use within the city. Now, I don't know exactly for sure where they
Depends on where you put it. I mean, that does some research on municipalities. Depends on where you put it. It could lose a huge chunk of it.
right. Usually municipalities have a portfolio of water rights. They have water rights that are senior and junior. And I know I'll jump to another valley in the Cedar City Valley. Cedar City proper had water rights. They held a portfolio of water rights. The curtailment would curtail water rights that they intended to use in the future, for example. And
Do you figure that they're pumping more than our water rights, or are really pumping what rights are issued at this point, or is that?
yeah, we can switch to Terry and he can answer that because pumping the water right, the amount of water rights, that's kind of a different question than what we're talking about here. We're talking about how much pumping compared to how much is physically available.
So I forget these guys' name that were just up here. They said our recharge is 80,000 acre feet. Are you close to preliminary numbers on a safe field or not? Do you have?
I don't have a number to
Do you have
tell
a
you
guess?
tonight. I would say it's close to 80,000 acre feet.
Just a couple of years, right? No, I'm just-
Yeah, no, but it is in that range. It's going to be in that range.
But the safe yield, does that determine, like, what's the economic benefit of having a water table up more than where it is right now? How much more money is the county revenue gonna be? Or do we just maintain the water level where it's at?
Okay, that's a very good question. We get that question almost every time we talk about groundwater management plans. Why? And maybe I'll rephrase how you asked it. Why not just let the water table go down and keep pumping?
No, we need to maintain it where it's at.
Okay, well, and that's what we would do with the management plan.
So their recharge, are we trying to get back?
No,
But we
no.
lost?
Yeah, the question was then, are we trying to get back? We are not trying to get back. We will not get back. And in fact, as the plan, like I said, in these other valleys, the plan is gradual, decades, right? Until that is last cut happens, that's when it will level off. So it's going to keep going down. There's going to be,
So balance,
right,
not really a recharge,
right.
not really going up.
Yeah, the goal is to get in balance, but not to try to pull back up. I'll let Terry talk about some of the policy issues. You ready, Terry? Okay.
So I've been kind of debating how to start my part off tonight. I was going to go funny, right? Start with a joke. Then I thought, maybe you better play it straight up. So maybe I better go in between. Let's start with a couple of questions. I need you guys' help to settle an internal debate at the Division of Water Rights. Okay? Over on the east side of the mountain, they say Pahvant. A redneck from Scipio says Pahvant. Which is it? Okay. There's that question. Okay. Next question. Who here in their heart of hearts will raise their hand and say we don't have a problem?
We don't have a problem we can solve. I think Mother Nature solves problems that we can't solve.
Okay.
I remember reading that study that he put up there in 1967 saying that the Pahvant Valley would crash by 1970. But I was alive in 1983, like some of you on the front weren't. And I saw what happened, and Mother Nature did that. And that had nothing to do how much water we pump from them wells. So I think, yeah, we do have a problem, but I'm not sure we can solve it. I think Mother Nature solves that. And I don't know how you're going to estimate what Mother Nature is going to do for us.
Okay, great. We look at the hydrograph for all these wells in the valley. Most of them were developed in the 50s, right? That's when the technology come on. Well, after World War II, we had the technology to start pumping wells. Maybe go back in a little history of the valley. In 1946, USGS published a report that was commissioned by the state engineer. And that report basically looked at the aquifer system in the valley and says, okay, how can we get economic benefit out of that underground aquifer? And they come up with some numbers of best science they had at the time. And that was the basis for the state engineer starting to approve large irrigation wells in this valley. Okay? And they did so based on the understanding they had. Come about 1958, 59, there'd been a lot of wells drilled. People are starting to pump them a lot. Most of these old wells, all you guys know, They had equalizer reservoirs on them, pumped into the reservoir overnight, maybe for 24 hours, and then let the water out at a higher flow rate and flood irrigated. That's how this valley is starting to be developed, right? That's the history. Long about 1960, they started to see groundwater withdrawal, groundwater level going down. And the state engineer, USGS said, wait a minute, maybe we got a problem here. So they commissioned that study that was published in 65. Okay. The 1946 study introduced the concept of the groundwater districts in the valley. And the whole concept that they had at that time was, we've got this big, broad valley. It's not homogeneous across this valley, as you all know. Go try to drill a well successfully up here northeast of town. Not going to happen. It's not homogeneous. And so their concept was say, okay, let's look at similar geography, similar recharge, and try to match the development in that area with those boundaries. That's where the groundwater districts come from. We've been playing with the 46 lines was a little different. The 65 study put the groundwater district boundaries in place that we've been operating under since that time. The 65 report basically said, in a nutshell, I'm going to be simplifying it quite a bit, is that would basically appropriated all the water there to be developed. We needed to stop on the big irrigation wells. And that's why in about 1960, the state engineer hit pause. And then in 65, the policy was we're not going to approve any more large irrigation wells. And oh, by the way, you guys have to prove up on these things by 1970. That's the history. They noticed the continual downfall of the groundwater levels. They were quite concerned about it in the 70s. And then we had the 80s come. Was it 100-year storms, 500-year storms? I don't know what it was, but it pretty much reset this aquifer. Right? It boom, 2-3 years of that precip like we had. Trav was telling me they couldn't even ride across their farm on a horse. It was so muddy down there. But since those years, you look at the hydrographs we have, and what does it show? Almost on a linear system down. So, Paul, Greg, thank you for putting this report together, trying to answer the hard questions we have before us. Current policy that we're operating under. That's what I was really supposed to talk about. Groundwater, the entire Sevier Basin's closed to any new appropriations. Every place but Pahvant Valley was closed in 1997. In the 94 public meetings we had talking about this same issue, the state engineer at the time let small domestics still be approved. That was true up until 2004 when Pahvant Valley was closed to those also. Everything has to now be done by change applications on existing water rights. Changes will not allow water to cross district lines as points of diversion. There's a few instances where place of use crosses of district lines. But we've held that line pretty hard. on not crossing district lines with the points of diversion, simply because we feel that is how the whole development concept of the valley come about. We probably should stay course with that. Basically, that's the policy. We all recognize we have an issue here. We don't have all the answers. We're here to work with you guys to get them. What my office is doing, and will be doing the rest of this winter, is we're doing what's called a water right audit. Okay, what's a water right audit? What we're doing is we're going into each individual water right. We're verifying the accuracy of the stuff in our database. Is the priority date right? Because if we start curtailment, priority date's going to be a big deal. Is the flow rates right? Is the place of use accurate? Is this a supplemental well? If so, how was it developed and what sole supply is associated with this well? We're going to do a deep dive in every one of these water rights. As part of that, if these water rights have had change applications filed on them, we're going to go to the next layer of the onion and look where that water come from. And we're going to check and see, well, this water's being used over here now. Did we dry up the like acreage over here? We are going to check that. We're going to compile all this data, summarize the findings of it, and it is going to go a long way towards solidifying this safe yield estimate we've got to come up with. That's Teresa's slide. I don't think anybody should be asked to curtail any water until I can stand up here in front of all you guys and say, we have looked at every square inch of this valley and we've addressed any illegal acreage, any expanded acreage, and any supplemental supply that's being used beyond what it was originally appropriated for. Those are going to be our efforts. I hope if you've got expanded acreage, if you're watering ground that don't have a right, stop. I don't want to do any more enforcements. They suck. But we do them. And they're expensive. We've done some that's cost some people a lot of money. I don't like that. So if you're in that situation, let's either get something changed there to cover it, or if you ain't got water to do it, stop. That's what we're doing on our end for the next 4 to 5 months. You guys got any questions for me? Sir?
So is there 8,800 acres in this whole, from all the districts being overwatered right now?
Don't know the answer to that.
Well,
The question was, is there 8,800 acres that's being overwatered now? That's what we've got to drill down to. When we did this effort in the 90s, the technology isn't like it is now. We actually had to purchase satellite imagery from NASA. And that satellite imagery was really expensive. And the pixel, how small a picture it took was 100 meters. Okay? It's like a football field. Google Maps is a million times better than that now, and it's free. So technology's come a long way. Part of our audit is going to be looking at that. Are you asking about where this expansion's come from, that we're looking at our numbers?
I seen a thing that you guys posted on, you got it right here, that says that you estimated 8,800 acres in this valley, for water. So that'd be a good place to start.
Certainly, if there's 8,800 acres of irrigated ground without a right, yeah, that's not gonna go on. Yeah, no doubt.
Hey, Jerry, has there been any, the saying is use it or lose it, our water. Is the state still enforcing that, forcing us to use every acre foot of our water or eventually potentially lose it?
7-year non-use stuff, right? That's what you're asking about. Yeah, it's still in statute. To have a water right declared forfeited from non-use requires some kind of a judicial action, whether it's an adjudication or your new neighbor says this thing's been abandoned and I'm taking you to court and getting it judicially declared abandoned. It'd take something like that to do. Where we kind of get involved in it is if there's a change application filed on a water right, we can look at it and say, is there something there to support this change application? If there's not, a protestant to a change application can bring 7-year non-use concerns in a change application protest, or the state engineer can bring up this quantity, rebuttable presumption of quantity impairment stuff. It doesn't forfeit the water right. We may not allow the change application, but it doesn't forfeit the water right without a judge doing that. Yes.
Does the division know, gotta make sure I word this right, does the division know how many acre feet of water for the valley there is right now under permit? I'm not sure I worded that right. Do you know how much is allowed to be pumped under water right now? Could you give?
That gets into some, the question is do we have a firm handle on how much water is allowed to be pumped on a yearly basis? Is that a fair question you're answering? Okay.
Is it 145,000 CFS, 149,000 acre feet? Closer to 80.
I can't give you a hard answer there. That's what this water right audit is about.
Okay.
The complicating factor we have here that we don't have in some of the more simple basins is we have a lot more supplemental rights here that are intermingled with surface. It complicates this picture a lot. And that's what my staff's going to be working on. Lucy's on fire on it. So yeah, we're working on it, but I don't have a firm answer tonight for you.
Tell us what supplemental means exactly, just so everybody knows.
Supplement. Okay, let's do a hypothetical situation, okay? Trav Bond here had a farm down to Meadow, and it was 100 acres. And he had a bunch of shares in Meadow Irrigation Company. Not Trav, his dad. Okay? Watered this 100 acres out of Meadow. He may have got water to that place up to July. Okay? 1950s come along, his state engineer starts appropriating some groundwater. His dad went to the state engineer and filed an application to appropriate for 5 CFS of water from a well to irrigate this 100-acre farm that he had. Okay? That well right was then approved and says, okay, you can use it on this 100 acres in conjunction with your shares in Meadow Irrigation Company. So say the shares in Meadow Irrigation Company on an average annual basis delivered 50% of the water required to irrigate that 100 acres. And the well contributed the other 50% of the water to cover that 100 acres. The well amount would be supplemental, but would be limited to that amount that it was supplementing, if that makes any sense.
Be 100 acres, but it was limited to full supply of only 50 acres.
Right. Right.
At 50 acres. Are you gonna curtail any of them?
Pardon?
Are you gonna take away any of them supplemental acres? When you're looking at it?
We will look at how, yeah, we're going to look at every water right and see how they were originally approved for and certificated for. Yeah. Take a supplemental right, like on this 100 acres. Okay, it was 5 CFS, right? You put 2 pivots in. All of a sudden, you've gone from 100 acres to 240. That's what we're going to be digging down and.
But your sole supply is 4 acre feet per acre.
That's the irrigation duty.
Exactly. But is there anything on supplemental? Is it 2?
No, there's no definition there.
Because I've never been able to find it if there is.
There isn't one.
So you just basically say on that 100 acres, they have a water right for 50? Is that what you're saying?
We're saying between the creek and the well, they can irrigate 100 acres.
But you're not saying what you can do with the well.
Does that mean you can turn the well on in March?
It's going to be different every year,
I
right?
know, because Meadow Creek don't run with it.
That's why I use the examples.
God. Okay, I give up.
Sir, the decree? The Cox Decree defines the surface water rights in the valley. We rely on the proposed determination decree maps to define the surface water place of use. Chalk Creek has filed change application on their place of use. So it would modify that map and would use the new map. But that's where the decree comes into their play.
Hey, Perry, I read the recent order put in place down on our neighbors, and I saw that there are different priority dates for when you'll implement the curtailment. How did you come up with those priority dates? How was, I see 50, 51, 52, 55. How did you come up with those?
A priority date on what is a priority date on a water right? In most instances, the priority date of a water right is the date it was filed.
That's good information. I want to know how did you come up with those categories? I just couldn't see that in the information on those.
How did we come up with that?
Well,
that is the date that water user come and filed that application with the state engineer's office.
great. That's not my question. My question is, how did you come up with the different categories for curtailment? Yeah. That's just-
I don't know Parowan. Teresa?
Well, I sort of think this preview, we're gonna have to go up. It's like, I don't know.
I understand. I don't know what happened in Parowan. I'm not familiar with Pahvant Valley. I've never worked down there.
So it was the work that we did together with the committee and the users in the valley. So you'll notice Burl, same. Work with the committee, work with the valley. What would the dates, the curtailment cut dates be? Same with Cedar City. So that's what we would do here, is work with the folks, a committee, the valley, and determine where those cuts would happen.
So what you're saying is you're gonna take the newest well, cut it first, and go back.
That's
Yes.
the only tool Teresa has in her toolbox.
So that's what the newer wells might go first, and then go back to the older ones to the state. Is
Yes.
that what you're saying?
Priority.
Yep.
First in time, first in line.
Yeah.
How
about residential?
Would they go to a residential home? Well,
Yeah.
it could go.
Mhm. Those are, so to repeat his question, is it all purely by priority, and does use matter? And as Jim mentioned, there is no deference to use. And in,
Someone could lose their water at their home, even though they're not irrigating or farming or using much water.
yeah, yes. That's the harshness, and those are some of the hardest conversations that we have with folks in the valley.
Basically make your home worthless if you have no water for it. You're cutting back, so
Can.
one well puts out 15 gallons a minute, and you got ones putting out 1,200 gallons a minute. Don't make a lot of sense there.
So to address, and I don't know if everybody heard that question or not, if he was close enough to the mic here. But just as in summary, and if I get it wrong, he was just questioning, so if there's a small domestic home that pumps 15 gallons per minute, and somebody that's pumping 12 second feet, that domestic home would get cut if they're a junior priority. And that is correct. It's truly by priority. One of the things that you're going to see, and I'm going to switch to the next slide.
Am I done?
No, you can stay here. I'll keep him for the entertainment value. How's that? So, and I'll get to your question in just a second. So one of the things that you're going to see on this website, and I don't know if it's up there now, but it will be shortly, as Terry's team works through those water rights and helps define those limits, what is the full limit of these water rights? Then we can look at the priorities, and what we'll post on this list is what on this website is the priority list. So every one of you will be able to go to that list and find your water rights and see where you are in that list.
It's up there now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now,
Also see the value you're gonna get from giving your water rights back to the state.
what's that?
And you also see the value you're gonna get from the state for giving your water rights back.
No, that's not on there. So his question was, is there going to be a value for the state to buy back the water rights? And the answer is no, it's not on there. The one thing I will caution with this list that's on there is it's going to change as these guys do their work on this water right audit. So you'll start seeing some changes happen there as we start correcting if there's errors entered into the database.
I've actually thumbed through this and found some of the rights that have had change applications filed on them are showing the priority date of the change. Things like that. That's part of what we're going to clean up in this audit process. Okay. And the other thing with this, you can look at it whole valley-wide. It's also broke out into districts.
Yeah. So kind of, let's address your question. You've been so patient.
Priority. So does that go back to when a well was drilled, or does that go back to where the water right came from when it was originally given?
So
If it was on a change application,
So my well, our house, and a little bit of acreage and animals, we transferred water in, existing water rights were transferred to there. So what is that priority? Is that one I did, or is that one that those water rights were originally given? Wherever they were originally.
I'll answer. You
Well,
gonna-
because if I transferred them 5 years ago, but they were issued 50 years ago, does it go by the 50 years or the 5 years?
So the question is, I'll try and summarize it for those that are online. So we have a water right that existed in the valley, somewhere in the valley. You purchased a portion of that water right, filed a change application to drill a well for your home. And so you're asking which priority date will you be regulated to?
Yeah.
Okay, so if that underlying water right you purchased was a groundwater right, that would be your priority date.
So the original time.
If you were in groundwater. Now, if you went from surface water to groundwater, that would be a different story. But we will work through all of this.
As long as it's you bought an existing water right and have it transferred like you're supposed to, you should be okay.
You will retain that old priority
priority.
day.
And would that be the same? You had to drill a new well.
If-
First one went dry, but you still using the same.
You did a replacement well? Yeah, it doesn't matter about the hole. We're talking about the water guide.
When
Yeah.
you originally got it.
So his question, just for the folks online, he was asking if you had to drill a new well because your first well went dry. The water right priority stays the same. You're just doing a replacement well. So we gotta, oh,
Just wondering if you guys have ever looked into shortening the time people turn on. Can you ever do that?
so, yeah. So maybe if we could talk about some of the next steps, because that question has come up in some of these other valleys. His question, just to summarize for the folks, was have we looked at pumping for a shorter period of time? Did I?
Yes.
Okay. So as we work through this process in developing this groundwater management plan, there's some things to keep in mind. If groundwater levels stabilize, then we put a pause on the management plan. If they don't, we keep moving forward on that management plan. We can modify the management plan with you through a public process at any time if we have different information. Other valleys have looked at, does a shorter season help? And it doesn't necessarily, but those are types of questions that we will work with this committee of folks to say, okay, what are some solutions to offset some of these curtailments?
How can it not happen? If you're talking 7 months out of the year, and there's only 12 months out of the year, you get only 6 recharge. You know, it doesn't make sense.
And it gets into the depletion amount, right?
Yeah.
Um,
But those are conversations that we will have. Some of the other valleys, just to kind of give you an idea, some of them had the ability to do some recharge projects where they were able to capture some excess surface flows. Not sure that that's going to happen here, but they were able to do that and do a recharge project, and I'm talking Pahvant. Some of the other areas looked at sewer effluent reuse for recharge purposes, or offsetting using sewer effluent for irrigation and laying off the groundwater pumping. So there's a lot of ideas that we can generate, but to be honest, it's so unique to the valley. Every one of these valleys are different in what you're doing and how you're doing it. And that's really where these public meetings are so crucial for us to have, but also for us to have a committee to work with to bring those ideas. And as we refine any more science, I think Paul talked about, they just hired a new person that could get at something. I can't remember what it was now. But if there needs to be additional study, then we can look at doing that as well to help refine the numbers. Let me talk about, okay, next steps up here.
Is any water, do these guys have any insurance that may or may not lose any water, insurance that the water that's taken from a certain area is not going to go somewhere else in the state?
I think that goes somewhere else in the state.
Yeah, or somewhere else.
The water right owner would have to,
Let's care about this,
yeah. So the question was, do any of the users have to fear, water right owners, I'm going to say water right owners, do any of the water right owners need to fear their water's going to get taken for the Great Salt Lake?
Well, yeah, for somewhere else.
Is that your question?
You may deem is not used, is below what their recharge is, but they don't have the ability to pump that or fill that. Do these guys know that that water is not going to go somewhere else?
So,
They take it from them and move somewhere.
yeah, so
somebody else can use
So it's
that
the
water.
water right owner that would have to file an application to do that. Now, we would deny an application trying to move water from here unless you had a really big pipeline to get it there. So it's not likely to happen. Oh,
It's an online question from Mr. Wardle. Can we get some insight on how the members for the local committee will be chosen? and the timeline for when that will be accomplished.
Okay, I'll adjust that as I go through the slide here. Great question. You've been raising your hand a lot there. No.
To clarify how the priority date is set, like 67-1 is not the first priority, so.
Likely not.
It was maybe appropriated first, maybe, I don't know.
Or numbered first.
So, but is it set on proof date, certificated?
File date.
File date?
File date.
Unless something happened to modify that.
Yeah,
Okay, so file date is different than when it was appropriated?
it's, that would be the same date.
But they could have, it could have lapsed, they could have lost, all that stuff could have come into play.
Fill under the gas, whatever.
Yeah.
But,
Reinstated at a later priority date, all
yeah,
that stuff could have happened.
and that's what this water right audit is going to verify. Make sure that we have the accurate priority dates listed. So let me talk about what we're going to do as the division. Jim mentioned we're going to dive into more of a safe yield estimate. That will also be with this committee. Complete the water right audit that Terry talked about. Determine measurement needs. A lot of people asking about measurement. Update the diversion and depletion estimates for each water right. That gets at these supplemental water rights. If you have 2 water rights that are allowed to irrigate 100 acres, you can't do 200 acres with that. And there's diversion and depletion limits that we need to make sure that people are within those. We're asking for public comment. Let me go through these last 2. Asking for public comment. That's where all of your comments are going to be critical to help us understand what we don't know. You're the ones that live here. You're the ones that turn on your pivots. You're the ones that open your head gates. And that's why we need the public comments from you. And then we will hold additional public meetings. In the meantime, what we found with some of these other valleys is that smaller committee really helps so that we can forward the information and keep working. And then we come back like every quarter or every 6 months or something to do a full public meeting to get the information out. But we can do that as often as you think we need to do that. So, let me talk about the water user, but I'll take what's your question?
On your hypothetical 100-acre farm, if somebody's watering 240 acres now with that supplemental well, when are those acres going to be shut off?
As soon as we find them,
As soon as that's identified,
As soon as it's identified, we're going to.
we're gonna start working to shut
Like
it off.
hypothetically, back to your question, Terry, back to your example, we all know like that farm, that 100-acre farm, would be watered 50 acres of it with meadow irrigation, is now being watered with totally by that well.
That's what we're gonna be looking at,
That's
Stace.
what we're gonna be looking at. Okay.
Terry, I just a quick question. Will this affect any springs?
Any springs?
Yeah, like for municipalities, let's just say Meadow. I'm over the water in Meadow. Will this affect any springs that we have?
Yeah.
I know
Springs are groundwater, right?
Yeah, so it's groundwater, but
repeat the question just in case. Can
Will
people
this
hear?
process affect springs? Okay, that's one of the things that makes this valley unique from the others, right? What do we got down there? We've got Clear Lake Spring. That's gonna have to come into the equation. Meadow Springs, certainly, but these municipal springs, they're gonna have a priority date of what? 1865? They're gonna predate any well.
but it could.
Could. However this all plays out, but yeah.
You're gonna start in 2025 and work your way back. Basically.
That's priority doctrine.
Yeah. Yeah. So let me go over what you as water users can do. I'm going to give you some assignments, but okay, submit your comments. We really need to get your comments. That's going to be helpful. If you, and I'll pull up a slide in a minute here of where to submit them, or pick up this card and it will have that information on it too. But please submit your comments. That's why we're here. That's what we're asking for, is feedback.
How long will the comment period be?
We'll do a 60-day comment period to get the comments in, and that will allow us then to go through those comments and get responses back for you, so that everyone can see those. The committee question online was, well, how do we form this committee? That's up to you. If there's 80, 100 people here, I think if 80 or 100 of you want to be on the committee, we'll have a 80 or 100 people committee. Typically what has worked in these other valleys is that there is a representative of each kind of sector. There's a municipal representative, there's an industrial, there's a wildlife representative, there's an irrigator, maybe from each of the, just as an example, from each of the districts that are within here. So if you have someone, or there's somebody that wants to represent a group, then have that person represent that group. And how to let us know, submit that on a comment to us and say, so-and-so wants to be on the committee, and give us the contact for that person. Sure, so-and-so. Then I'm gonna look for you to fill that so-and-so seat. How's that? Oh, great. So one other item, metering. There was a lot of questions that came about the study, and there's a lot of estimates that have to be made, right? We have to estimate. What we have learned in these valleys is it is more helpful to have actual data to determine safe yield, to determine cuts, to determine what that is. So we've kind of changed the process. In some of these valleys like Burl, we came in after the plan and said, hey, why don't you guys meter? It would be very helpful if we enter into this process with metering. And how many of you are familiar with ag optimization program? Oh my gosh, just like 3 of you? Okay, we got some work to do here, Brett. So ag optimization, this last year, the legislature funded about $200 million for ag optimization projects. One of the buckets of money is for metering and telemetry. Currently, it's a 50-50 match. If you're selected and you apply for that meter money, then the state will fund you. It goes through UDAF, the Utah Department of Agriculture and Food, 50%, and then you provide that 50% or get it from somewhere else. This year, there is an ask that the legislature raise that to 75%, and then the producer provide 25%. The next round of ag optimization funding is going to be opening January 1 and will run through February. It's a great opportunity to apply for some of that money that's available under that program.
You're paying people to put meters on?
What's that?
You're paying people to put
We're doing a match.
Huh?
We're doing a match. So its question was,
volunteer, it sounds like.
yeah, if you want to apply. Now, there are some, when he asked, I'm trying to repeat some of the questions. He asked if it's just volunteer on the metering. So the state engineer can order meters be put on, and some of the change applications that have been filed require meters to be installed. So there are some users that are already required to meter.
On the newer stuff, sounds like.
Yeah. So
One other on meter things, there's been discussion in the past for possibly accessing some of the money that was refunded to the county from the central Utah to pay for meters. I mean, that idea has been thrown out in the past. You'd have to take that up with your county commissioners and I guess the Millard County Water Conservancy District now.
Oh,
Bill's
he left.
gone. But that has been something that's been discussed in the past.
So
Will the state recommend that? I mean, because different meters that we wouldn't want to go get. They're good, but there are so many that sound mount meters might as well maybe guess what's coming out of it.
Yeah.
Fluctuates.
Let me answer or repeat your question. He's asking
And
if,
also the distance and stuff on the discharge,
right,
any interference with check valves, gate valves, butterfly valve, any bit of construction, we have to have a certain amount of distance to accurately measure.
yeah. So this question is ensuring accurate measurement. So as part of the ag optimization program, Department of Ag has planners, which many of you may be familiar with, the folks that do the planning. They will work with each of the users, and then we will help to make sure that it is an accurate measurement and that it's installed properly. And that it's
Every meter manufacturer, I mean, so many diameters upstream, so many diameters downstream.
Yeah.
Yeah, our statement there would be, you need to install an accurate meter.
Yeah. So
Bam.
What do we gotta do to get everybody to put a meter on so we can actually get accurate information to make a plan?
yeah, and so that's a really good question. What are we going to do to get everybody to meter? What's very interesting in these other valleys is that they are now saying, please meter us. I think that it may take some time talking with folks in the valley to get to that point, but all of the other valleys are going that direction. And where that benefits is when we talked about some of these solutions that may be available. One of the solutions that the folks in Borough Enterprise presented to us had to be metered in order to make it work. And so I think some of these solutions are going to drive that need for measurement. If there's still folks that just refuse to meter, we can do an order to make that.
Yeah. That was going to be my point.
It's an order.
If push comes to shove, Teresa can issue a distribution order.
Yeah, but we're going to work with folks to get those meters. So the last item on here, this is participate in this process. Please, that's why we're here. We don't want to be talking to a wall. There's a concern, there's an issue here, and now's the chance for us to work together to try and figure out what do we do? How do we move forward? Fix some of the problems that are occurring, but you need to participate. So help us do the best that we can to make sure we have the right information. Water rights are being used how they should, so that when elements come, it's accurate when it happens. So question over here.
So to summarize this whole meeting, you're the state engineer. Did you come down and you're figuring right now that this valley is only 145,000 acre feet, correct? That's kind of what your guys are saying.
It's an estimate.
Okay, it's an estimate, and you have an estimate that we're putting 80,000 feet back in, right?
It's an estimate.
That's 65,000 feet that we're overusing. That's what this meeting is about. You guys are saying that we're overhandling 65,000 acre feet per year. And that's kind of be your driving factor as we go forward. It's at 65,000.
That's going to be a starting point.
That's what you're here.
Yes. So, but why we need to work with you folks, get a committee, get better measurement, is so that we can narrow in what are those real numbers. Because there's no point in curtailing water rights if we don't know more exactly what is being pumped, what is the recharge, and that's what we're here to do. Right. He said we got to know the total number of water rights. I'm going to go back here. He had a question on the wall.
Put a meter on your well. Now does your water right go off of, I mean, the way you put your water onto your land, is it still the same acre per amount of acre foot? Or can you distribute your water on your land however you want, as long as you're not going over your water right on your meter?
So the basis of a water right is the beneficial use. Every water right has a defined beneficial use. So we use this 100-acre example. So that is the limit of your water right, the 100 acres. That's what we would look for, whether you're putting an acre foot per acre, 4 acre feet per acre.
But not really any.
It's the 100 acres is what we would look at. And there was a forfeiture question that was asked earlier. It looks at that beneficial use. If that 100 acres is being used, you have your water right. There's nothing to be forfeit. There was a,
Yeah, my dog is a lot different in this fight, and that's Clear Lake. Okay? My interest is Clear Lake. As a waterfowl hunter, voted for a lot of my life, right? It's gone. My dog is pretty much dead out there. And the pictures they showed and the picture they painted doesn't do it justice how bad it is. Places that I would be afraid to walk with chest waders on, I'm running English setters through Kochia and Saltgrass for state enemies. So Clear Lake is dead. And I get that, right? And I know ducks aren't going to win against some alfalfa and crops. I understand that. So the UGS report, that's just a question. They explicitly stated that excessive water right related to rain. So if we get this plan together, excessive implies too much, not an increase. Right? So if there's excess is clearly staying with this plan. Is there going to be, you know, they have water rights in the 30s.
It's a Terry Clay.
They going to be in favor, you know, part of the management plan, or is it going to be clearly it's just done, and we're gonna manage so it's done. We're not going to give back its 20,000 acres we had in the 90s, or is it just over?
so the question, or so that he's asking the question, hopefully.
Long-worded comment, question.
The long-worded comment and question. His interest is with Clear Lake, and he's asking, are we just considering it dead, or are we going to try and bring it back to what it historically was?
At some level.
At some level. Part of the plan, we will consider the discharge to Clear Lake as this management plan area. We talked about maintaining levels where we're at. How difficult will it be to bring some of this back? This is the process that we're going to determine, can we even bring that back? So not a specific answer right now, but
Just here on the back here says, recharge 8,000, 9,000.
seems pretty bleak.
There's 5,000 acre feet in play. You know, I'm just, and I know it probably won't happen in my lifetime, but I just was curious about that.
Yeah.
And then another comment is, don't let what happened in the 90s happen this time. Right? Let's do this, right? In the 90s, it was tried, and it failed. And that's on state engineer's office to make it happen.
Yeah.
It didn't happen last time, and now here we are. Right? The cans can kick a long time down, and now there's maybe some really hard choices made because they weren't made 30 years ago. So I would just encourage for that. And I don't know. Clearly it's a disaster from what it used to be. It's a shame.
Okay. I'm not going to repeat your comment because I can hear you from out of the laptop out there. So I think we caught you online. But I think that your point taken, and I think that was pretty well heard, Mike, the comment. I think your point is well taken, that as we look at this committee, I would expect a wildlife person to be on this committee, to contribute information about the species that these guys mentioned. That's going to be valuable to have. So maybe as a wildlife interest group, figure out who that is.
Okay. And then one last comment is that if you guys haven't read the USGS, that is, yeah, no,
The recent study?
yes, it's online. It is complicated, but it's easy to read and it's well written. And I mean, it's really good. It lays out the assumptions real well. They're all there for you to attack, agree with, whatever. I would encourage it. It's easy to read
Okay.
for a complicated topic.
Okay. So I'll come to your question. So this last slide that I just pulled up here, there's the QR code for those that are online that can't pick up a card, or for those that are here to take you to that page where you submit your comments, waterrights@utah.gov. You can mail them to us as well on snail mail, stick a stamp on an envelope with your comments in it. You can do that. We'll happily accept them. But I think most people now use email to submit comments. So that's where, and make sure your subject line is public comment regarding Pahvant. And if you do have a comment or question on the study, we'll make sure that Greg and Paul are involved in that response to get it posted.
Start at the front, for you to take up, so we have our information.
Yeah. Okay, question over here.
Couple of really quick questions. As we all take a haircut on our water rights and we have less acre feet, as we become more efficient farmers and use less water, will there be discussion to lower the duty from 4 to 3? Let us utilize the acre feet that we have that's metered. So if we can be more efficient with that, we spread those acre feet out farther and having to have a required.
So his question is, would there be a potential solution if you become more efficient, deplete less, or only want to pump the depletion of your water right that you historically have instead of the full duty? That is a solution that Borough Enterprise presented. We do that through a change application process, and we are testing it in that area. Does that work? But they're looking at only pumping the historic depletion, and then they've thrown it out on some additional acreage because they have triticale and other means to do that. So that is one of the creative solutions that we're working with that particular valley to see if it will help. Trying to think of the right word, help stave off the first cuts that are coming in 2030. Will that help them? So I think that we've gone through some of these creative ways with some of these other valleys that we're happy to say, this is what we did in this valley. It might work here, and bring it here.
And that leads into my second question. I've been studying the water right list that's been put out, and it showed you the prior date and the acre feet and then the depletion number. Can you explain what that depletion number is and how you figure it?
Yeah, so the depletion that's calculated there is an estimate. The original numbers were, I guess, computer generated based on certain groups. Part of what they're doing with the water right audit is that they will look at a more appropriate estimate, but we use mainly Dr. Hill's numbers for depletion. Now, in other areas, we have, as Terry talked about, new technology. We can use like OpenET and some other methods that David and Kayvon out in the other room out there will be looking at to utilize.
Presently, we're basing our depletion on the Blaney-Criddle method. So,
what is depletion?
What is depletion? It's the amount that's consumed by that use.
Now we're actually
Very simple, yeah.
So instead of having 4 acre feet, that person's only using 2.5.
So if you divert, if let's say you pump the 4 acre feet, the crop may only be consuming 2 of that 4. So now if you get more efficient in your agricultural operation, maybe you only pump 2 or 2.5 or 3, something like that.
Are you trying to balance your depletion number with your recharge number, or to your water right diversion number?
Which is a good question. So in a groundwater system, we would look at what are you pumping from that aquifer. So some of the creative solutions have been to reduce the diversion. and focus on depletion.
So, overall plan is depletion.
So if you're depletion of the water rights to the equal. So if we look at your chart, once he gets his swimming exercise over, it does a deep dive. And that depletion number equals the 80,000. If that 80,000 ends up being the right number. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. I am sensitive on your time.
Your
You
battery's
guys,
done dead, and they can't hear you out there.
uh-oh. My battery?
Laptop has failed, so.
Is the laptop dead? Okay, are there water users out there? There's chairs in here. So we're still online, but I think the laptop died out there. So if there's water users. So I think there's a lot of people that are starting to leave. We are well over time. So we're happy to answer some additional questions. I don't know, Mike's looking at me back there.
I just say let's close the public meeting.
Yeah.
Stop the recording, if that's okay.
Yeah, so I think that would work well since we are losing some of the folks and we've lost our stream out there. Let me just reiterate, please get your comments. Please let us know who would like to be on a committee and let's start working together on what we need to do here. But we'll go ahead and end the public meeting and the streaming, but we're here to answer your questions. So happy to stay. I don't know if they're going to kick us out of this room or not, but we'll stay till they do.
So